trauma is stored in the body. It goes with you no matter where you go, Beth, emotionally, mentally, and physically.
Introducing The Vixen Voice, a podcast for ambitious women entrepreneurs ready to move into their feminine essence, live their truth, and unlock their full potential. I'm your host, April Roberts, and each week I'll be interviewing inspiring women who decided to take a leap of faith to pursue their dream. Women who believe that they were born for something bigger. Hey there, just popping in quickly. It's April Roberts, and I wanted to thank you for being a loyal listener of the Vixen Voice. It means so much to me. And because of that, we're going to be popping in these little announcements because I want you to be the first to know what's going on at the Vixen Gathering. So if you haven't done so yet, click the link below and check out the Vixen Founders Collective. The members who are already in are raving, and we would love to have you join us in the ultimate business consulting, networking, and personal growth community for Gen X female founders. See you there. Hi, and welcome back to the Vixen Voice. I am excited to bring you our expert panel today. We have Norma DeLau, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She specializes in complex trauma, immigration, grief, and relationship issues. So if you don't know what complex trauma is, no worries. We're going to dig into that today. And I mean, who of us doesn't have relationship issues, right? So you definitely want to stay tuned to this episode. And our other guest is Krystal Casey. Krystal is a widowed mom of 5. So you can imagine she has a very fun household, right? She's also an international best-selling author and the founder of Flight of the Phoenix Collective. So today we're going to be talking about trauma, self-care, what busy moms can do to keep their sanity, what's going on with your relationship, who knows? But these are universal topics that I believe we can all relate to. Both of our guests today are also very spiritual, so we're going to have a lovely, beautiful conversation. So ladies, welcome to the Vixen Voice.
Thank you. Hi.
Thank you.
Awesome. So, Krystal, I'm going to start with you. I've done, 150 something episodes, I think, of the Vixen Voice, plus all my clients. So I chat with women all the time, just like y'all. And it's such an honor. And it's beautiful to see the amazing patchwork that we make up when we put us all together, because we women have a lot of things in common, but we do things in our own way, right? And most of us have had a life. I mean, we've already shared in your bio, you've had quite a life, right? And that makes us uniquely who we are today. So, Krystal, my first question for you is, speaking to you as a woman and an entrepreneur versus being the expert, what's a pivotal moment in your life that really helped craft the woman sitting here with us today?
Wow. First of all, thank you for having me here. I'm excited anytime I get to share my story and help other women to reclaim their voice. That's so important to me.
Love it.
There have been many, many pivotal moments, but the most pivotal moment was when I discovered that my husband had been abusing one of our children. And I myself, as a child, had been molested. When I spoke up about it, I was pretty much told that happens sometimes, still family. And looking back, that tells me that this has been a generational pattern. There's history, trauma that was never spoken about. But when I discovered what happened, the moment I discovered what happened, I took them straight to the authorities and I told my family. When people reached out to me, I told the truth. I didn't hold back. I didn't sugarcoat. I didn't hide the truth. I spoke it and I continued speaking. I started a blog, I co-authored a book, and now I'm speaking on stages. I have a podcast. This is literally all that I do. And in speaking up for my children, I've also given a voice to the little girl inside of me who was not spoken up for. And so that would have been it, the most pivotal moment.
Yeah, I can imagine that moment kind of shatters your life, right? And then
Mhm.
it's like, what do I do next?
It was never a question for me of what to do next. After that, it's been a bit of a puzzle to figure out. But right away, I knew the first thing that I had to do is I had to speak. I had to recognize it. I had to acknowledge it, and I had to give it a voice because how many of us are shamed into silence? Not
Mm-hmm.
just about this, but about so many other things. And I just, not anymore.
I love it. And I imagine that you speaking this truth, although the purpose was, like you said, to save your children and to take care of your children and speak up for them, that it became a healing process for you as well.
Absolutely. It is. I'm still on
Mm-hmm.
it. We lost him in 2021, so this
Mm-hmm.
is still a journey. Healing is not linear. It's messy. It's a roller
Yeah.
coaster. It's up and down and chaotic, and some days are better than others. This year is better than last. And yeah, we just keep taking it a day at a time. And in sharing my journey, yes, it's begun healing myself as well. But what has really struck me is how many women have reached out and have similar stories, and
Mm-hmm.
they
Mm.
never spoke up, or if
Yeah.
they did, the abuser was protected
Yeah.
versus the victim. So every time I hear that story, I know that I am doing what I was put here to do.
That's beautiful that you found your purpose. And thank you for sharing that people are reaching out to you. And thank you for sharing your story. I had a guest on earlier this month who specializes in domestic abuse, physical abuse, and emotional. And she said the stats are 1 in 3 households have it. And that just
Mm,
absolutely shocked me. And sometimes the numbers are much higher than even reported, right? And so
all the time.
yeah, I know a lot of people want to say, this isn't my problem. I don't want to hear this, but probably someone you know is dealing with this if it's not happening in your household. And it's so important for we women here on earth to really support each other. I mean, the feminine energy needs support and they need the safe space to go. So, again, thank you for speaking your truth. We are definitely coming back to this. You have an incredibly compelling story and you're so courageous and brave to share it. And also, I love that you're coming from a place of love. It was love for your children that really you had no question, right? This is what I'm going to do. That mama bear energy popped up, and look at how much it's helping you and everyone else. So thank you for channeling that energy and a positive momentum. I do want to give Norma the stage for a little bit so that we could hear her story as well. And then we'll come back and dive in deeper. Thank you so much. Hi, Norma. How are
Yeah,
you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you, Crystal, for sharing. I know it is not easy to share, right? It's those moments of being vulnerable and wanting to share some pieces of ourselves, right? That make us who we are now, but it hurts. It is painful. And finding that person who can listen to us, it is really hard. It takes a lot of trust, a lot of courage for us to do it. What it makes me a therapist and specialize in complex trauma was my own experiences as well. Mine started when I lost my mom when I was a teenager, and it was really difficult. It's no words to explain it. It's all bunch of emotions coming through, and you don't know which one is what. Like anger, sadness, the frustration, right? But it's like, how can I name it? They took over my body, right? So this is trauma, but we don't call it trauma. Back then, it was just like, yeah, just deal with the loss. You lost your mom, and that's it. Life has to continue. You need to move on. You need to do these plans. At that time, I was living in Mexico, and after the funeral, I was like, okay, let's move to California. Like right there, one after another one. I was like, oh, how can I make sense of all this? How can I process a new language, new culture, new people, in dealing with a loss? It comes to the moment when Crystal was sharing her story. It's like, yes, that's how you feel. Like that's what it is, trauma, right? All those emotions and not knowing, and then you stand up and say, no, I want to share it. I don't want to leave it like that. And with me, it was similar. It's like I was looking for counseling. I was going to school. Can somebody help me here? Is any emotional counselors here? And it's like, oh, we only have academic counselor. So it took me years to get into an emotional counselor. so somebody can support me, somebody can help me to process my emotions. And it was like long time, almost like 10 years to find that
Mm-hmm.
right person. Because when you go to a therapist, it's like, well, do I connect with a therapist? No, maybe yes. Okay, no, let me move on to another one that really fits. So it is really a struggle to heal.
Mm-hmm.
When they say, hey, healing is available, it takes more than just wanting to heal.
Yeah, I agree. And thank you so much. I love that you touched on if you're not vibing with your therapist, however you want to call it, if it doesn't feel right to you, go try another one. Like, don't give up or anytime you want help, because you do have to find that right person that you're going to relate to and who can help you and challenge you and get you past that moment. So thank you for sharing that. And I mean, wow, again, you lost your mom, which is a life upending moment. And then you moved to California, which I've seen the studies that when you make a major life move, like moving like that, it takes about a year just to get your foundation back under your feet, right? Not just full normalcy, but your foundation, but to have those two compounded together. And Krystal's had a series as well. I mean, it's almost like you can't get your foundation back, like you can't even get your footing. And that's really kind of the first step to healing. But you two are the experts. So share with me what you think about that. What's a good thing if someone's having like a major life disrupting event, either externally or internally, that's creating trauma? What should they do? What are some tips?
I say first and foremost is to get support. Like Norma
Mm-hmm.
said, there's no one way to heal, but
Mm-hmm.
I believe that nobody is meant to heal alone. It
Mm-hmm.
takes a community, it takes a tribe, whether that is a professional, support groups, online groups, podcasts, books, friends, and to just start taking one step at a time, literally one step, one breath, one moment at a time, because each moment and each day will look different, will feel different.
Yeah, it is true. Having that person can make a huge difference, right? And one way that I use to explain what is trauma, when we hear trauma, we think it's like, oh, it has to be something like really, really bad, right? Really
Mm-hmm.
big. But it's not. How I share is like, imagine a cheetah and a zebra. They are in their wild and their own environment and they had to survive. But what happens when the cheetah is like start getting closer to the zebra? So the zebra is automatically is like, oh, it's danger over here. You need to either
Mm-hmm.
run or do something because hey, you need to protect yourself. But the cheetah is getting closer and closer, so the zebra start running and running and running. Hours of running or trying to escape. What happened with the zebra? It's like her body's gonna collapse. Her body's
Mm-hmm.
gonna start being always like in danger, right? Like, hey, you need to run. It's no time for her to stop and relax. Is she's gonna be able to sleep? Maybe not, because she's always hypervigilance. It's like, hey, I'm in danger. Or what is gonna happen to me? When is she gonna eat me? Right? So one way that we explain trauma, like it's not just what happened to you, but how and for how long you
Mm-hmm.
are experiencing the same thing, the same cycle, right? Physical abuse, emotional abuse, verbal
Mm-hmm.
abuse, being neglect, right? Those are the things that we hardly ever see or identify because we as a humans we tend to say, well, if I see it, I believe it. Right? If I see that, oh, you are hurt or something happened, a broken bone, I believed you. But what happened with the verbal and the emotional abuse that are happening, that is going on in the system of the zebra, in her body, in her mind, in her spirit, right?
No, thank you for sharing that. And especially the concept of duration, because I think that often people underplay that. So, a couple of things can happen. It can be severely traumatic and happen all at once. For example, when Krystal found out about her children being abused, which obviously didn't end that day, but sometimes it's maybe not to that degree of severity, but it extends along. And so you get exhausted. And that's what I'm hearing from you. So, Norma, while you're chatting, can you share with us? I know you specialize in complex trauma. So, what is complex trauma? Can you define that for us or illustrate it?
Yeah, it is the event, right, that happened to us. like the loss of my mom. It's
Mhm.
just trauma. Complex trauma, we're talking about like repetitive, right? I was sharing with a zebra that she doesn't have to escape 1 hour, that she needs to be in surviving mode for months, for years. So this is what happened in a household with domestic violence or any type of abuse, right? Physically,
Mhm.
sexual abuse, where the victim has to live in the same household than the perpetrator
Mhm.
for years. So it's like one after another one after another one. And it's the duration that makes a complex trauma, right? It's not just one incident,
Mm.
but it's a repetitive incident. So physical, verbal, emotional abuse or being neglected for so many years, right? So that makes it a complex trauma. And is what is going on inside of us. It's not just what happened, but
Mhm.
how we interpret that in ourselves, or brain, or physical body, how is storing all that. That is complex trauma.
Yes. Krystal, is this resounding with you as Norma's talking about this?
Absolutely. I, for years, went to therapy seeking help, knowing something
Yeah.
was wrong and not knowing what it was, and was misdiagnosed, put on medication for things that did nothing but give me horrible side effects.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got pregnant, I stopped all medication because nothing was
Mhm.
working anyway. And I was pregnant. I didn't want to be on anything. So that's actually what led me to yoga and holistic healing and things
Mhm.
other than therapy and medication. Realizing
Mhm.
that I had been prescribed medicine and therapy, but nobody asked about my background. Nobody asked about my day-to-day habits, my sleeping, my eating, my relationship. It was until I went in to therapy again after I had my first child that somebody said, it doesn't sound like you have any of these mental illnesses. It sounds like trauma. It
Hmm.
sounds like trauma. And that's exactly what it was. Like Norma said, it was repeated incidents over my childhood that was every day, day in and day out. And so I was constantly living in fight or flight, walking on eggshells. What's going to happen? And I thought when I got older, when I removed myself from the situation, it would get better, but they didn't. And they didn't get better with just therapy, and they didn't get better with medication. And that's because, like Norma said, right? So that's what actually needs to cause trauma is stored in the body. It
Mhm.
goes with you no matter where you go, Beth, emotionally, mentally, and physically.
Yeah, and there are actually more layers than that.
Yeah.
So, and you may not be able to answer this, but again, I shared that I had a guest on who is very articulate. She works with domestic abuse and all the forms. And really, part of what she does is better inform churches how they can recognize and be there because, a lot of times you're having this issue and everyone scatters or they don't know. Or, like in your case, Krystal, oh, that's just family. Like, family just does these things, right? So, how could this like trauma be better recognized by people that can help? How can people be better informed about trauma? Churches, ministries, therapists, who could help that could better recognize these symptoms of trauma? What is the disconnect? I mean, for me, Krystal, to hear that, it breaks my heart to hear that you were put on all this medication for mental conditions that you didn't have year after year after year. And if someone had recognized it was trauma, you could have been helped so much sooner.
Agreed. And I think that today it is a bit more recognized and understood
Mm-hmm.
than even 10 years ago. And there are a lot more trauma informed therapists, trauma informed yoga instructors, trauma informed coaches. In general, we're beginning to recognize that a lot of our mental conditions are trauma based, they stem from trauma.
I totally agree. We need a lot of psychoeducation, right? As a society, it's like years ago, nobody talks about this, right? One of my things as a therapist is like, I want to be able to talk about emotions like I'm talking about having a coffee or something, like normalize our emotions, normalize that we're human beings. Emotions is what it makes us human beings, and we don't acknowledge that. We don't talk about it openly. So it's one of the things with trauma, or emotions are like shame, confusion, powerlessness, right? Helplessness. Those are the really strong emotions that cause trauma. And we don't talk
Mhm.
about it, right? Why? Because we are ashamed of talking about or on trauma. We don't have that strength to talk about it because of being into the trauma. It's like, what I'm talking about. Do I have a right to talk about it? How can I express it, right? And then it becomes how affects the body. It's like we go to the doctor
Mm.
and like, hey, I had this problem, right? Like physical symptoms, chronic pain, muscle tension, headaches, all type of disease, right? And they give us just, oh, let me give you a prescription for this thing.
Yeah.
Super easy. But nobody asked me about my childhood experiences. They just focus on one thing, the physical. Another one, they just focus on the mental. And for
Mhm.
me, as the work that I do as a therapist and also a healer, it's like, no, I want to come and connect the body, mind, and the spirit and my heart.
Yes.
Why? Because that what makes us human beings, and it's the complexity of being humans that we cannot avoid or we cannot ignore one part of ourselves. We need to address everything. One thing with trauma that we cannot even start processing is, are you feeling safe here with me? Do
Mhm.
you feel safe? If the person says no, we not even go into process trauma. Why? Because I'm gonna do the same thing that happened to them, and they will be re-traumatized over and over.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things that are happening right now with so many providers. Is like, let's jump in into the trauma, let's jump in into this. And I'm not saying that everybody should do it, but safety, it is number one thing that we need to pay
Mm.
attention to it.
I agree. And I think that people skip over that because they want to solve
Mhm.
the problem, right? And you don't realize that you can't even get to the problem. I actually had a client who came to me for healing work, and her friend had an appointment with me, and she said, I'm going to give my appointment to my friend. She really needs your help. And I'm like, okay, it's first time I meet her. And we get on, and I could just tell this woman was like below ground, like, needed to even just get above ground. Like she wasn't even standing on land. I mean, I was like, look, here's my goal. We're going to get you above ground where you can breathe, and then we'll talk about the work. And then, that's turned into a beautiful relationship. And then she hired me for business coaching and all this other stuff because she feels safe with me, because I saw that she was not safe, right?
Yeah.
And I think, and I mean, I'm not a trained therapist, I'm not an expert, I don't want to claim any of that, but through my healing work and my intuition, I can usually see when someone has something. And so just recognizing and just helping them feel loved. And I actually did a solo podcast yesterday about soothing yourself, because it's going to come out in the
Mhm.
middle of the holidays when everything's chaotic and crazy, right? Learning to self soothe is incredibly important. And I don't think that many of us gives
Yeah.
ourselves that gift or luxury. And that's why we become so needy and we need others. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but if we could learn to put the oxygen mask on first, then sometimes, obviously, these types of trauma are different. But a lot of times, if it's daily stress and daily things going on, if you were self soothing, you wouldn't get to this traumatic point, right? And Krystal, I know you're huge on helping busy moms self care. Can we dive into some recommendations there? And then, Norma, I'd love to hear from you too. How can we go about this? And, being honest and countering me if you're like, hey, a traumatized person is not capable of doing that, right? Like, let's have a very real conversation about this. So we can talk about someone suffering trauma and then just people living stressful lives. It's two different things.
Definitely. So, the beginning for me, self-care was the very simple things of getting out of bed,
Mm-hmm.
taking a shower, making sure that I stepped outside of my house, even if I couldn't bring myself to leave, to get the fresh air, to get the sunshine, to get away from the screens, giving myself time to just cry and just be tired and just rest, and just giving myself a lot of self-compassion and grace. I really had to step outside of myself a lot. And I love to give the example of, how would you treat your best friend? If your best friend came to you and was feeling this way, would you make them feel guilty? Would you shame them? Would you tell them they should be doing other things? Or would you comfort them? And so that was a very pivotal shift for me personally.
Yeah, no, that's huge. I use that same analogy, so I love it. Like when I talk about self talk, catch yourself. Would you talk to your best friend this way? Would you talk to your daughter this way? That's a stronger question, right? Would you talk to your mother this way? And why is it okay to talk to yourself this way? I mean, that's self care as well, watching how you speak to yourself in your mind, because that's some of the most damage we do. Norma, what would you like to add to this question about self care and soothing?
How I did it also was a lot of sleeping
Mm-hmm.
because my body was in survival mode, right? And it's one of the things that happened in, during trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine this zebra for how many years was running. So she was exhausted, and I was exhausted. My body was
Mm-hmm.
exhausted about fighting, about surviving, right? And always with a fear, always carrying those emotions. So I did a lot of sleeping. I felt like I slept for so many hours the first year that I was doing my healing process because I just wanted to come and sleep. I did a lot of yoga. For me, my body keeps the score pretty well. It was a lot of physically storing my emotions. So when I tried to practice yoga, practice sports to get it out, to kind of bring something new to my body. So I did a lot of hiking, basketball, swimming. It helps a lot. I find now
Mm-hmm.
swimming is one of the greatest sports that we can practice because it kind of connects us body, mind, and like the emotional piece and like get it out. So swimming becomes one of the best ones for me because my body was not connected anymore with me, with myself. So I want to recover my physical as well. So while I was processing all that and eating a lot healthy food,
Mm-hmm.
teas, it helps a lot. Like to bring something soothing with my body, and that helps a lot. But it's so many things that can help us, right? Meditation, like a spiritual work, praying. I went into praying more and more to help me to get that peacefulness in my mind, in my body, that I was okay, that I was safe right there.
I love that. Thank you for sharing all those different ways because everyone goes about different things. I particularly love what you shared about sleeping and swimming because I sleep a lot when I'm going through things. And we
Yeah.
live in a society that might make you feel guilty for that if you're of a certain age or certain responsibilities, right? And so I always tell my clients honor the crash. If you're going through something, like honor the crash. If you need to sleep for a day, if you need to watch Netflix for a day, like whatever it is, which is not normally productive activity. And it's interesting because when I was going through the trauma of my husband starting to use cocaine again for the third time, I found myself swimming 4 times a week. And I would just
Mhm.
walk there and swim. And I went from 0 to like hour-long swimming in no time. So now that makes like a ton of sense because my body was needing to process what I went through. So I love
Yeah.
this because a lot of times when you look backwards, things are so clear, but obviously when you're going through the trauma, there is no clarity. So if you feel like you want to sleep, go sleep. Like Krystal said, if you feel like you want to cry, cry. Like
Right.
just don't give it too much thought. Our body, spirit, cellular level, energetic level is so wise. It tells us what we need if we're listening, right? And that's what
Yeah.
I'm hearing from both of you. Krystal, I know you talk about generational trauma a lot, and you mentioned it in the context of this episode. And I'd love to hear from both of you about generational trauma because it's a word that's being kicked around a lot now. And I think it can have different meanings. So
Yeah.
I'd love to talk about generational trauma and just what it means to each of you, because I think there's a lot of generational healing going on in the world right now. And maybe that's always been the case. Obviously, I'm only conscious of this lifetime. Maybe it's always been going on, but I feel like there's a lot
Yeah.
going on right now. What is your take on that?
For me, when I talk about generational trauma, I
Mm-hmm.
am referring to the harmful patterns and habits that we learn and then tend to pass on to our
Mm-hmm.
children. So, this is something that we all do
Mm-hmm.
naturally. And the trauma part of it comes in when we just continue to pass that trauma along versus somebody stepping in, recognizing it, and doing something about it. In my case, I believe that the sexual abuse has been passed down. It's something that happened that we didn't talk about until it came to me. I started talking about it. I'm changing that. I can already see the effect on my children and how they speak up and how they use their voice and how they're not afraid to
Wow.
speak their mind or to step up and do the right thing. So for me, that's what it is. It's changing those negative things and holding on to the best parts of it and passing that along.
I can speak personally and professionally, right? When we do the genogram with my clients in therapy, we usually find out it's like, oh yeah, my grandma happened similar, right? Happened to her. My grandma, it was in the same situation. And then when I come into the healing world, I usually see it like generations, women trying to heal in like physical abuse or domestic violence. And then we find out that when I'm doing the healing, I can see all these women lining up right there. It's like, hey, I want to heal too. That connection, we transfer trauma, right? We get trauma into generation and pass it on, but we can also pass on healing, right? That is
Yes.
the healing word, as you say, is like, hey, my kids are talking now. My kids are speaking up now. That's my point, that we can pass on healing into the future generations. We cannot do anything about what happened in the past, but we can
Mm-hmm.
rephrase it. We can heal now, right? And one of those things that are like crucial in therapy and healing trauma is building that resiliency through connection. Relationship are essential. Like if you feel that you are alone in this trauma process or all this time, because we tend to isolate ourselves when we're dealing with those shameful feelings with the trauma, what we say, nobody's gonna love us, I'm gonna not answering the phone calls anymore, nobody love me anymore. No, we need to rebuild those connections. We need to heal in a safe environment with relationships. That's why relationship is crucial in healing trauma, connecting with them, building the attachment, again, the healthy attachment.
I love it. I was going to ask you what are ways we can heal, and you're answering it already for us through relationships. And then, Krystal, I wanted to also go to you. I know a big part of what you talk about is reclaiming your power after trauma. So, talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that is kind of like we talked about in the beginning. I believe there's a lot of power in using your voice, a lot of power in allowing yourself to be vulnerable and authentic. I believe there are a lot of times we are taught to just kind of power through, to toughen up. And we need to face and feel in order to heal. If we don't allow ourselves to feel the emotions and to process things, we're not going to be able to move forward and break the patterns.
Yeah, it's so true and so beautiful because I think we've all been in a place where we were numb and we're not moving forward at all when we're numb, right? So
Right.
incredibly true. And so you may want to avoid the feelings, but really stepping into it in a safe space with help really can propel you forward. Awesome. Well, ladies, this has been a very beautiful conversation on a very difficult topic. So thank you very much for bringing
Thank
your
you.
heart and your stories and your courage to the table for this conversation. And I hope that everyone listening honors that. And I hope that you both continue in that because it's a light that the world needs. So thank you very much for that. As we wrap up, I want to go a little lighter and back to you as women. I like to say a lot of my work is helping women, even though I'm a business coach, I help women step into their feminine essence. God has asked me to bring them back to peace, joy, and love. And the funny thing is, when that happens, they make more money. So that's how the business coaching works, right? So I always like to focus on our feminine
Yeah.
energy because it's so beautiful and multidimensional. Everyone on earth has feminine and masculine energy. But I'd love to hear from you, Krystal, and then Norma. What activities or at what time do you feel your feminine energy really just flowing? And it could be mama bear, it could be a softer version. I don't really care. But like, when do you feel the power of that feminine energy and like you're really in your feminine essence?
I would say, and I hate to sound redundant, but it comes back to authenticity,
Mm-hmm.
vulnerability, and connection. When I am connecting with women like you, with
Mm.
listeners like those listening right now, when I am hearing stories, sharing stories, just being around women, when we're laughing, when we're talking, that's it for me, right? When I
Yeah.
can just authentically be who I am and be vulnerable and not have to feel like I have to hide or feel ashamed.
Yeah, I love that. And Norma, how about you?
Krista, you kind of, it's kind of similar, right? In social settings with women, when I'm there and sharing who I am as a human being, not being
Mm-hmm.
judged, I feel safe. I feel that I can be myself. I don't have to hide any part of myself, but I can show the whole world, right? This is who I am.
Yeah.
This is my values. These are my inspirations. This is what I want to accomplish, right? My dream. And once I step on that, it's like I feel to the fullest, right? I feel like shining and all this.
Hmm.
When I feel that I'm a step on my journey, I'm a step on my mission, this is where I belong. If I feel that I belong here in this country, that I belong where I am in my family, in any place where I go to share my story, to share about trauma, to share about my profession, my healing work, that peace, it makes me full. It makes me completely, it
Yeah.
makes me alive.
I love it. Okay, so Norma, what color is your feminine energy?
Ah, I would say like light pink.
I love it. And Crystal, how about you?
Pink and glittery, lots of sparkles.
I've
Nice.
gotten a lot of sparkles and glitter this week. So mine is, I call it magenta because it's a little more purple than pink, but that like deep,
Mm,
solid, I love jewel tones. So absolutely love it. Thank you,
nice.
ladies. It's been such an honor and a pleasure. I know we had severe technical difficulties, but we worked it out and we made it happen. Obviously, if you're listening this conversation, I promise you was 100% meant to be because it was not easy for us to get here. So you are listening to something blessed. So
And
thank you, ladies.
if I
Yes,
want to
please.
share something, I feel like we were talking about complex trauma. How
Yeah.
we handle situations now, it means and it reflects us the whole work that we have done because we were able to
Yes.
survive, we were able to manage. We did it. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter what happened to us, it's how we react and how
Yeah.
we handle those situations. So I think it was an experience for us.
I totally agree. I love it. I love it. Thank you for tying that back. So, for everyone listening, if you listen a lot, you know that I always say the world needs more love. So, my challenge to you today is how can you go forth in more love? You heard these ladies beautifully talk about very difficult times in their lives and very difficult topics, right, that are triggering to many people. So, let's really reflect on how we can show up more loving as a safer place when someone needs us and knowing it's not about us, it's about them, and that we are serving at that moment. So that's my challenge to you this week. Ladies, what would you like to share as your parting message to our listeners?
I would just like to encourage everyone to trust the process. You don't have to have everything figured out. Just start where you are, lean into what you have, and take it one step at a time.
I love it. Beautiful. And Norma?
The healing is transformative and we all
Mhm.
need second chance. We all have that beauty inside of us, so it's an invitation for us to connect with our inner selves and bring them back, give them that strength, give them that love, that resilience and peace, and acknowledge who we are.
Yeah. So beautiful. Thank you both. For everyone listening, if you want to get more of our amazing guests, all of their information is in the show notes. They have amazing offerings for you, free tools to help you. You can follow them on social media, stay in touch. And if you loved this episode and it touched you, please let us know. The greatest gift that you can give me is a beautiful review, a note. You can DM me directly in social media and DM our guest and let them everyone know that they touched your hearts. That's why we do what we do for you. And the easiest way you can get all of their fantastic information is going to vixengathering.com/podcast and hit subscribe. Just share your first name and your email address. And every Tuesday and Thursday, you get the amazing resources from our guest and all of their contact info delivered to your inbox. So, ladies, thank you so much. Again, this conversation was for sure meant to be. And I thank you for everything you do. And for everyone out there listening, I'll talk to you soon. Thanks again for listening to the podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to hit subscribe so future episodes are automatically downloaded directly to your device. And if you want access to today's show notes, including links to all the resources we mentioned, visit vixengathering.com/podcast. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week for another episode of The Vixen Voice.